On this podcast, I talk all about those hard money conversations. But why? Because handling your finances can be stressful. So if you're feeling stressed over money, I want to help you. Head on over and grab my free Stop Money Stress Now guide. This will help you learn how to stop money stress, work through a budget, and get yourself organized. Because when we're organized, we're able to see things a little bit more clearly with less emotion. So head over to laurencabello.com/podcast and grab your free guide now. Now, back to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. I am so glad to be joined today by my friend Farnoosh Torabi, who is a journalist and three-time author, working on her fourth book. But she is a wonderful friend, and also her last book is called When She Makes More. And she talked about being a financial female breadwinner in her family. She's also a mother of two, and her kids are 4 and 7. So I brought her on the show today to talk about a topic, something that I know that I've personally struggled with, but also a lot of other people that I know struggle with this topic, and that is mommy guilt when you're a working mom. And this is a topic that really affects a lot of working moms out there. There are a lot of women who feel like they have to have it all together, and they feel like they have, they're constantly juggling all of these different balls and things are dropping all over the place, and they just can't seem to catch a break or catch a breath and, get their stuff together, get their act together. And I wanted to talk to Farnoosh about this because she is an amazing entrepreneur, breadwinner of her family, mom of 2, looks like she has it all together. And I know that a lot of people think it can appear on social media like I have it all together. And I certainly do not. As a single mom of 4 kids, it's hard sometimes trying to work and get my work schedule in and keep my house clean and cook dinner every night and try to, get all the laundry done and have any sort of social life and keep my life in a place which is manageable. And the reality is that I think that Pinterest and Instagram make all of us feel like we don't have our lives together because we only post the beautiful things. And the reality is life isn't all so beautiful all the time. Now, on the other side, it's beautiful because I get to live the life that I want to live, and Farnoosh gets to live the life that she wants to live. But maybe the word I should say is it's not so pretty all the time. But as a working mom, as both of us, what we talked about today is really learning what things to outsource, what expectations to place and take away from ourselves, and how to manage being the breadwinners in our household while trying to raise children. So let's go and talk with Farnoosh about this topic of mommy guilt and being the breadwinner of our family. I think you'll really enjoy it. So let's go and talk to Farnoosh. All right, Farnoosh, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to talk a lot about mommy guilt and being the breadwinner in the family. Both of us are breadwinners. And I don't know if you have mommy guilt, but I know sure as heck know that I do.
Yeah, I do. And I know I do. And I catch myself feeling it. And I'm like, oh, you again,
Right.
I know it's not rational and that everybody's okay, but it's just my own, it's what it is like, I have these expectations, right, of what I should be doing or what I think will matter. And sometimes it's just a false narrative, like dinner doesn't have to be on the table by 6, and you can cheat your way through parenting during the day if you have to, and that's fine. And dropping balls is sometimes really, really important. Tiffany Dufu has written a whole book about this, how a lot of times women and moms in particular, we just take on so much, and it's to our detriment. Like it's not a long-term solution to anything.
Right.
As we'll discover.
Right. So a little background on you. I mean, you were an entrepreneur in the personal finance space, a journalist for many years before you had kids. So, and before you got married. So when you were coming into the union with your husband, as somebody who already had a career and all of that, what were some of the conversations that came up early on in that relationship when it came to finances and to like how you wanted to raise a family? Because I was brought up in like, a Christian home. So like my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I am so grateful for that. But I didn't have a role model of what it looked like to have a working mom. I didn't know. I didn't know anything of what that looks like. So here I am, a working mom, thinking that I have to act like a stay-at-home mom, right? Do all the things, but yet run a successful business. But there was never that conversation coming into the relationship, because my business started when we were already married. So, what kind of conversations did you guys have when you first got together, I guess, you and your husband?
Well, in the beginning of the relationship, we were making equal, I would say. We were making a similar wage. And then things changed for me when I was launched a book, and then I got laid off actually, and I had to start a business. Well, not had to, I really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you're like forced into the things that you really should be doing.
Right.
And my income grew. And I think my husband, and we always discussed, it was never a question of how much longer was I going to work. I was always going to work. I was always going to make money. And if anything, I was hoping to make more and more money throughout my life and my career and do more things, and have a family. That was never an either or. And I think I was just really lucky in that I ultimately was able to find a partner who respected that and was excited by that. But I think I invited that into my life.
Mm-hmm.
I went on a lot of dates in my 20s with men that were perfectly nice, ambitious, probably would go on to become very financially successful. And that I just knew like that was not the person for me, because this person probably would want a partner to join him in whatever he's building, right? As opposed to being a real team player. These were men who were raised probably with moms who didn't work. And so they also didn't have that expectation that they would get married and be with a woman who worked. My husband's mother worked throughout his years, so he was able to see that modeled for him. It's so important what is modeled for you. It really is. It doesn't mean that you can't grow up to be an adult that decides for yourself, but it is a huge influence, and it's subconscious a lot of times.
Did your mom work when you were growing up, or was she
on and off?
Stay at home? Okay.
But I think that my mother never loved her jobs, right? And she never was, listen, my mother, I'm writing about her now in my forthcoming book. There's so much to unpack there. She, when we were growing up, Lauren, I bet someone asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe they asked an important follow-up, which was like, can I help?
Yeah.
And my mother never was asked any of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, she was born in Iran and she was married off at 17, 18 years old, had me when she was 19, thrown into a lot of big responsibilities at a very young, naive age. Motherhood, marriage, and also being an immigrant in this country where she didn't speak. So all this to say that my mother, I don't think she ever really like fully actualized her life in the way that maybe we have. And she's very happy with like having been the mom, right? And proud of her kids. And that gives her a lot of gratitude. She's very grateful for that. But I wish that I never saw in my mother like this passion for work, because she didn't really have an opportunity to figure out what that would be for her, and make a living out of that. And also culturally, in the Persian culture, you grow up much like, I think, like a lot of religions or cultures. Like my parents we're not really religious, but I guess you could say we were Muslim, or we were like initially brought up with like a Muslim faith.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the point is that sometimes when you're raised with these constructs, these predetermined constructs, like I was not, it was ironic. I was expected to become the woman who would complete her education. I went to graduate school. My father was always like, ask for more money, get the raise, sign up for the 401k. I got a lot of financial literacy growing up, fortunately, but we never discussed relationships. I never talked about who I was dating. It was a taboo. Funny enough, right? In my friends' families, dating was not a taboo. They'd bring their boyfriends to the house. They would make out on the couches. We would never talk about money. I had the reverse. We talked about money. We did not talk about your love life.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only did I not really have like a lot to see as far as examples, but there was like no discussion invited in the house about money, about relationships, until of course you reach a certain age and your parents are like, when are you getting married? And you're like, well, it doesn't just happen, right? It did for them because it was an arranged marriage. So I don't know how we got here, but I think the point is that no, I didn't really have a lot of examples, and there was some shame even around my once I was making more. And while in our relationship, it was never a problem, so to speak, where my husband and I had tension over, you know, who was making more. But I will say that there was some tension from my family, my mother. I wrote about it in the book, you know, just the cultural expectations again. And it was coming from a good place. It wasn't like, we want you to be, we want to strip you of your financial independence and you should lock on to a man. It was more that they just didn't trust that a woman who was the breadwinner and wanted kids, that was sustainable.
Right.
Like, who's going to take care of the kids?
Right. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Right.
Like,
yeah.
Really, they just, and what kind of man makes less than his wife? Like, there were all these, you know, these thoughts, and it's not just my culture or your culture, it's America.
Yep.
Too. Like, if you look at Pew Research, they look at men and women and households and our expectations around breadwinning and who should be the provider. A majority, 70% of men and women believe this. They believe that men should be the primary financial providers in a household. I mean, in a country where we don't have subsidized childcare, someone often needs to stay home, or you have to outsource it. But when the average income in this country is $45,000 a year, that doesn't leave you with a whole lot left.
That doesn't.
After you pay for daycare. So I understand that why this paradigm exists. You know, we're not set up for options in some cases. So I'm very privileged to be able to have the life that I have. I chose this because I could afford it. You know, but so there were headwinds from my mother, and also, you know, culturally, like, you go to a dinner party or you go to a work event, or I'd go into a job interview, and it sometimes would come up that either I was writing a book about female breadwinners, or, you know, I was interested in this topic, or maybe I announced, you know, somehow, like, I didn't preach this from the rooftops, you know, but like sometimes it comes up and you just experience that feeling of, you're just immediately othered. You're like, oh, am I the only one here that, you know, or maybe you have a community at the dinner table, but they don't want to talk about it.
Yep.
I always said, when I would bring up the topic of female breadwinners and I was writing a book about making more, I knew that some of the women at that table were in my shoes, but they just didn't want to discuss it because they were uncomfortable, their husbands were uncomfortable. And I want to say that, you know, a lot of times we discuss this and some of the takeaways are like, well, men just need to, you know, need to get themselves together and just realize, like, it doesn't matter who makes more. And I agree with that. There are definitely some men who need to work on that. But then there are also women who are not comfortable with this concept. Like, they didn't want this. I interviewed so many women that wanted more of what they saw modeled in their upbringing. They wanted to be like the stay-at-home mom or the part-time working mom, because that's how they thought you had to do it. That's the only balance there is. And then their husband got laid off in the Great Recession, and now she's working full time, and she's resentful because she hasn't given up any of her home life responsibilities.
Right.
She's
And
still
maybe she
coming
feels like
home.
she's drowning.
She is drowning. And there was never a conversation like, well, since now our careers have shifted, or you're looking for a job while I'm working 2 jobs, things at home need to also shift. So one of the big pieces of advice in the book in the early pages is, when there is this shift, that whether you asked for it or not, it maybe sometimes it falls on your lap, like incomes flip, job priorities change, that you really then map that to what's happening at home and say, okay, where do we need to make adjustments, and how can each of us continue to provide in really meaningful ways on the home front,
Right.
And negotiating that. There's a really great book that Eve Rodsky wrote called Fair Play, which I think is a great complement to my book. It really goes deep into the exercise of figuring out how to create a level playing field in your home life, not necessarily reaching for 50-50. That's impossible, but that each person is contributing. And there's another great book that I interviewed the co-authors. There are a couple. It's called the 80-80 solution, or the 80-80 marriage.
Okay.
And the idea of like, just, again, it's not about 50-50, but it is about each partner giving 80%. Like this over generosity. When you see your partner drowning, or if like your partner wakes up late one morning, don't give them side eye, like just get it done, and it will be reciprocated, the next morning when you have a tough time getting out of bed and you can't get downstairs to make all the lunches and do the whole school routine.
That's a team, right? And I know, having been, Mark and I were married for 15 years. And during that time, the last couple years of our marriage, he quit his job to come and work for me. And so that was the role reversal change. Now, suddenly I'm the breadwinner, right? And the role reversal change of that was very, very difficult for us. So much so that I think it a lot of time contributed probably to the end of our marriage, because we just could not get over that role reversal part. But one of the things that I always struggled with was exactly what you talked about, which is holding on to that idea of, this is not what I wanted, right?
Yeah.
So I came in and started this business and it blew up, and I never strived to be an entrepreneur. That wasn't my goal in life, to like start this super successful business. I just wanted to pay off debt and help people doing what I was doing what I had learned. And then it turned into a full-time job. Now, I have always struggled with, and this is something that probably in the past 2 or 3 years, I've really like feel like I'm good at this place in my life, but I've talked to other working moms that have struggled with this. And it's the concept of that when you hang out with like other, like, so where I live, and it might be different for you because you're, in the city and there's a different culture in the city, but I live in like a small town in upstate New York. Right. And there's either like working moms, or there's like, there more than anybody is stay-at-home moms, full-time stay-at-home moms. There's tons of them. And I just have never clicked with the full-time stay-at-home mom crew, because I'm not in that like, area. There's like barely any entrepreneur moms. I don't know like any around here. And so I've never fully clicked with either group. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a set work schedule, and I don't have this. I'm not a stay-at-home mom, but yet I have duties of both because I'm a single mom. So there's been these, changes of like, well, where do I fit? And it's like, you don't have to fit. You just be you, right? Do what works for you, and then find people that fit into your life that accept you for you. Right. But I think you hit the nail on the head where you were talking about expectations. As working moms, we have to be able to let things go. Like, I have to, like, dinner might not be like it was growing up for me, which is you sit down at the dinner table every night at 6:00 with a home cooked meal. sometimes it's just not going to happen every night.
No.
We might
And
just
if your
do mac
daughter
and
wants
cheese
to eat
or
chicken nuggets
takeout.
3 nights in a row,
Yeah.
give her chicken nuggets. I mean, especially in the pandemic.
Right. This is so funny. I remember on Instagram, you posted a video of your kids riding their bikes in the hallway. And I just thought, yes, Farnoosh, I just love you. You just have to like make things.
We made a lot of enemies with our neighbors who are working from home. And we're like, what are those kids doing in the hallway? And I was like, they got to get their physical education.
What else are you supposed to do? I mean, really, it's like we're living in COVID times. Like my kids have not left these walls.
The kids will be okay. There was a study recently, and it's a debate. I don't know if it's like the definitive study, because I definitely like, even in my parents would disagree on this, but like the question of what determines your child's kind of success rate in life, or like what are the best ways to set your child up for quote unquote success, which may mean different things to different people, but like at the minimum, it probably means like this person is like adjusted, a quote unquote good, empathetic kid, not a psychopath, right? Mm-hmm. And this study says it's so much of who we become is in our DNA. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, a child born in the lap of luxury versus like poverty, we're not saying that, they have, they're both starting at the same base in life.
Right.
But the idea that you as a parent might influence your kid to shape a certain personality type or shape a particular, I don't know, proclivity towards things, like a lot of that is hardwired and predetermined. And it's fascinating. Again, I don't know how I feel about this, because I'd like to think that I still can mold my children. But my mother especially, she's like, no, because she wants to like feel like all of her days and years spent parenting us like paid off. Like she gets so much pleasure in seeing, both her kids, entrepreneurs, standing on their own 2 feet, mm-hmm. as an immigrant who came here with nothing. I mean, that's and I will say that, I don't know about my brother. I'm sure he feels a little bit like this too. I very much feel like I can't screw up, Lauren, because my parents sacrificed so much and they built so much with so much less.
Yeah.
And I started out in life on third base.
Yeah.
They were like still in the dugout.
Yeah.
And like, what's my excuse? If I don't feel like finishing a deadline or getting my act together, like I got problems.
Right. I love that concept that we think we have so much control over our children. So we have this mom guilt that we're not doing enough. Right. One time I said to a friend of mine, and she's quite a bit older than me. And I was like, I just feel like I'm not around for my kids enough, or, maybe I'm not showing up enough, or, always that, like, am I enough? Am I doing enough? Like,
we're doing more than the 1950s stay-at-home mom. Okay.
Well, and you know what she said to me? And she said, I was like, I feel like I'm just going to screw them up somehow. And she said, honey, you're just not that powerful.
Yeah.
And I just said,
you're not that important.
So true. You're just not that important. That like there are bigger and better things. And, I am a religious person. And so I do believe in God. And I think that for me, like that for me is a guiding light. And it's like, honey, it's just not that powerful. Like, just let the universe or God or whatever you believe in take its course. Because as moms, we do want to feel that we have control and we can mold our kids into this thing and do enough. But then also, I think comparison too is another thing for moms, seeing what our friends are doing or what
and some moms
I'm not doing.
Can I make a public service announcement? Like, moms, we all love our kids, but our kid is not the most special kid on the planet. Nope. And these moms on social media that are just like, or even in your friend circles that just can't stop talking about how brilliant their kids are and how talented their kids are and how their kids are. And it's like, I don't really understand what's the point of all of this. Like, your kid's not even in the room, Right. My mother never, and it kind of bothered me as a kid, because she would never praise us in front of other people, very rarely, because she was turned off by the parents who would. It was just egregious and like confusing. Like, well, who is this really just for your ego?
Mm-hmm.
You want to reflect, your kid's a reflection of you, right? So
Right.
you just want to keep on talking about how amazing and wonderful and smart and genius they are. And I think for the kid, thank goodness he's not in the room or she's not in the room, because that's a lot of pressure, right? To be held up to those. I mean, there's that whole other study that's like, stop telling your kids good job.
Yeah.
Because they need to know when they're screwing up too. And not everything's a good job.
Yeah. And you know what? One of my 16-year-old son, he has asked me not to post him on social media. That's his choice. He's like, doesn't want to be anything on social media. I posted like a picture of one of his artwork on Facebook and he caught word of it. And he's like, Mom, can you please take that down? And I'm like, okay, why? And he's like, I just want that to be like between me and you and like Dad, you know? And I thought, okay, that's very humble of you and I'll take it down. So to be able to communicate, have those kind of communications with our kids is super important as well. So, well, let's talk about like, okay, so mommy guilt, what are some things that us moms can tell ourselves and remind ourselves as we're working moms, as we're trying to take care of everything? What are some good things that we can tell ourselves to help our morale or maybe help take away some of that mommy guilt a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I have found that like focusing on quality time, even if it's just like sitting with my kid and watching television, like all they want, it depends on their age, but like right now my kids are 4 and 7 and all they want is for me to sit next to them, and we don't have to talk, but they just want to like have me sit next to them while they're reading a book or they're watching TV, but they do want my presence. And of course, being home in the pandemic they've been a little spoiled and their expectations are way out of whack. Like this is not normal. Mommy's not home all day usually. But I think it's important for mothers and fathers to remember that everything's relative. When we catch ourselves saying things like, I'm not spending enough time with my kids, think about how much time your parents spent with you and how much time your grandparents spent with their kids. The reality is that the dynamic between kids and parents has really shifted over the generations, where kids are now like center stage. It is the focus, like everything is about your kid and there's never enough time. There's never enough like attention, and you gotta like, and there's a lot of pressure to design your life around your children and your children's needs. And I think that's important to some extent, but you can see how that can get really out of hand. And if you think about previous generations, even as I said earlier, like the stay-at-home 1950s mother, she was not doing crafts with her kids in the kitchen for 4 hours a day, right?
She was like, go outside and play.
She said, go outside and play. And I don't do that with my kids because I'm afraid they're going to get hit by a car,
right?
Or get thrown into a child sex trafficking ring, you know, because I'm I have fears of
don't we all?
I don't so all this to say that you're spending a lot more time with your kids than you are giving yourself credit for. And I also think it's important to, like, I never grew up, and I'm not saying like my parents failed in this way, but it just wasn't our culture to walk around telling your kids like, I love you all of the time. And you know, I think like as an adult, what it ended up was that I had a hard time saying it for the first time to people too. And now I can say it because I've been like, I want to, and I know it's important, but like just telling your kids you love them, telling them you're proud of them. I remember this story I told my son because he's, you know, he in the beginning, he was struggling with reading, and he was kind of like academically, like, you know, had some more areas for improvement than the, you know, kid his age. And so he knew that, but we were very encouraging. And, you know, he was getting a lot of like, I'm so proud of yous. And we would say them, and we never really thought, you know, he didn't say anything back. So we were like, whatever. Then my mother-in-law, she hung out with him one day, and she said, you know, I want to tell you that unsolicited, Evan came up to me and said, you know, Gigi, my mom told me she's proud of me.
Oh.
And it's so, words matter when you talk to your kids, and tell them why you're proud of them, pointing out, I need to catch myself, like pointing out to them just as much as all the things that maybe they need to improve upon, but also the things that they're getting right.
Mm-hmm.
And outsourcing the hell out of your life.
Yep.
Is very important. I told my kids in 2 years, you're going to learn how to do the dishes, your own laundry. You're going to, I'm trying to do the chores thing with them. It's just hard to make it consistent, but I cannot wait. And that when I say outsourcing, I don't mean just like hiring a TaskRabbit, like leverage your kids.
Yep.
They can also,
and find out what works for your family, because I don't do the average, like every day you do this chore, because that doesn't work for me. My work schedule is so all over the place. I can't keep on track of them. So once a week I come down with index cards and I hand them all a job and I say, you get this done, you get $10. And in 45 minutes, my entire house is clean. That's how I do it. Because
when you have multiple kids,
yes,
you gotta leverage it. Why do you think, people had like 12 kids back in the day? Because they had farms.
Yeah.
And they needed them to be tended to.
Right. And you have to find out what works for you, and how many years I spent searching Pinterest for like chore charts, and then I would set them up and color code them and then never do them because it just never worked for my family. So you've got to find a system.
I mean, it's one thing if you're passionate about cooking and you like, this is your hobby, but I'm like, if the ingredient calls for folding anything in, or I have to get a rolling pin out, like this is just not,
it's not you. Yep. Yep.
I like the 3 ingredient dinner.
There you go.
One of those, like, what do you call air fryers?
Oh, I love those. Love it. And that's what you have to find, what works best for you, and figure out the things that you don't like to do. Like for me, I hate doing deep cleaning of my house. So having a house cleaner is an important thing for me. Right. And I hate doing laundry. So that's something I'm looking to outsource this year is outsourcing my laundry, because that could take me literally all week with, I do it the week that my kids are at their dad's house. And one thing that I think is really important too, that to talk to your kids about is things like, Elf on the Shelf, right? Like, I know a lot of people do that. And my kids will say, why don't we get an elf? And I'm like, I'm just not an Elf on the Shelf mom, you guys.
It's a lot of responsibility. So many mornings, my kids were like, Mom, the elf didn't move. What happened? I was like, she must really like the bench by the window in the living room. I don't know. She found her comfort zone.
She found her comfort zone. See, that's the thing, is I know myself and I know I could never keep up with it. So I'm never starting it. So for me, it's all about knowing my weaknesses, knowing my strengths, and not getting myself into something that I know won't be successful. And then communicating that with my kids. Like, I'm sorry, I am not a Pinterest mom. I'm not going to sit and do crafts with you. That's not my skill set.
Pinterest. I don't think I don't have a visual. I'm not a visual person as much as I'd like to be. Actually, I think it's really cool if you can be that person. I just get really overwhelmed on Pinterest. I'm like, I can't click on anything. Nothing's taking me anywhere. It's just a lot of images.
Yeah. And I always say, like, I am not a Pinterest mom. I'm not a Pinterest perfect mom. I'm not going to like do the crafts with you. I'll sit and do a puzzle with you. I'll sit and do Legos. Like, my brain works like that. Like, when there's like an ending and a solution, I can do that. But my kids are very like, I can communicate my strengths with them of this is what I want. And what's really cool, I think, of being a working mom too, and maybe, as your kids get older, is especially my daughters seeing, like, after everything that I've been through, and I know I shared a part of my story on your podcast, seeing after everything I've been through and them watching me come through this victorious and just be like a badass businesswoman, just like growing and continuously being passionate about my work that I do. And your kids are going to feel the same way of just watching you. And I hope to open up new conversations with them that you don't have to be a stay-at-home mom. You can be a working mom and a mom. You can be working and a mom and married and still be very, very happy. Yeah. But you have to learn what balls to let go and
I think you
all of
hit the
that.
nail. And you could probably tell by now I like studies. And there was another study that I came across in writing my book that said, it doesn't matter what you choose in terms of like, is this going to be right for my kids? So much as, are you happy doing what you've chosen? If you're coming home from work every day with a sad face, that is going to leave a mark.
Yep.
If you really rise to the occasion as a stay-at-home parent, that's great. If that's where you source a lot of your sense of self-worth and your desire for living, like that's going to show. And I think that's a very important thing to reflect onto your kids. They really just want the best for us.
They do. And they want you to be happy. They really do.
Yeah.
And they can sense when you're happy. And I think
Yeah.
how often, as we wrap up talking, that when do we as women, when did it become normal for us as women to forget about our own happiness, right? And that like, no, we have a right to live a happy life. We have a right to raise our kids the way that we want to. We have a right to have our own opinions. We have a right to our careers the way that we want them to be and have our partners the way that we want them to be. We don't have to follow the old patterns of our life, and we can do what makes us happy. That's what I want my kids to learn, is that you do what makes you happy and you don't care about what anybody else says.
Yeah.
Let that mommy guilt go. Let the opinions of others go. And there's a quote that I shared before that that says, I used to love what everybody thought about me until I tried to pay my bills with their opinions. I love that one.
I love that. I'm going to use that. I might post that on Instagram today.
Yeah. Isn't it good? Like,
really good.
You just can't worry about what other people are going to say. And I think a lot of mommy guilt comes from this external pressure of what we think we should be doing in life, which really is expectations that we put on ourselves. So I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. Yeah. I've been looking forward to this. And I know we're like tag teaming here. You're going to be on my show. And I look forward to everybody hearing your story. But thanks, Lauren. It's been nice to catch up after all these years.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thanks for coming on. All right. All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Hard Money Talk show. It's interesting that she shared that a lot of her friends don't want to talk about being the breadwinners in their relationships. I thought that was pretty interesting. It's something that I'm super proud of in my life, but being single at this moment of my life, I don't have to worry about a man being embarrassed by me making more than him. But I do think that if I were to get into another relationship, that would be a conversation that we would have of, are you uncomfortable with the fact that I run a successful business and that I'm not going to stop running my successful business, and that I like to work and I have a vision and I have a goal and I have dreams and I want to help people. And that's a passion of mine. So that would need to be a conversation in the future. But as far as my kids go, I think that one of the biggest things that she touched on, which I really, really appreciated, was the expectations that we have on ourselves, right? As moms, oftentimes we put all of these unrealistic expectations on ourselves that we have to have it all together. And the reality is that that's just not going to happen. So when we let go of those expectations on ourselves, then our lives become a lot more fulfilling. And so some of the expectations that you might still be holding on to, maybe it's the expectation that everybody has to sit down at dinner at 6 o'clock together and have a home cooked meal. Maybe that's an expectation on yourself because that's what you did when you were growing up. Maybe that's something that's really important to you and you're just not willing to let it go. That's fine. Then maybe the expectation is you need to let some other things go so that can happen. So we might have to let some other things go and choose the greater things in life in order to have that happy life that we really want. I know for me, a lot of my kids don't play sports right now outside of school because I just can't handle it. I can't handle, the back and forth. I can't handle being a working mom and a single mom and cooking dinner and taking care of the kids and the pets and the house and all of that, add that on top of it. It's just too much for me. So those are the choices that I had to make in my household. And obviously that's communicated with their dad as well. But these are the kind of conversations that we need to start having, right? What are the greater joys in our life? What are the things that are most important to us, especially when we're working moms? Because a lot of times, not only are we working, but a lot of times if you're not communicating with your spouse and you feel that maybe you're doing most of the housework too, like the cooking, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, the errands, all of that, paying the bills, because I want to give some of that burden maybe to the other partner. Maybe you guys can communicate about it. Maybe you guys can become a team about that. And that can be one of the balls that you hand off to somebody else. So I hope that this money conversation opened up some ideas for you on how to let go of those expectations for yourself. Because what happens is when we have expectations on ourselves, those are just resentments waiting and they're creeping up. And suddenly, if you have expectations on yourself and maybe expectations on other people, maybe your spouse, those expectations, unmet expectations, are what turn into resentments and anger. And so we don't want you to get to that place of anger and resentment. I want you to be happy, right? So let go of the expectations, figure out what's most important in your life, let go of that mom guilt and the guilt of having to do everything for everybody all the time. Give yourself a break, give yourself some grace, and you're going to be a lot less susceptible to feeling guilty about what you're not doing instead of being able to enjoy the things that you love to do. So let's flip the script a little bit, right? Enjoy the things that you're doing. That's the goal, not the mommy guilt. Because when we take away the things that we don't like, when we outsource them, or we find a cheaper way to do them, or we get our kids to help us out with them, then we can really focus on the things that we love to do. And then we don't feel guilty anymore. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. Thank you, Farnoosh, for coming on and chatting about it as another strong businesswoman. And if you want to check out the show notes to today's podcast, you can go to laurengrutman.com/podcast. And I will see you next week for another Hard Money Talk. Bye.